Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the satsang this evening, or whatever time of day it is for you, wherever you find yourself as you listen to this. I have been reflecting today on what I'd like to share with you and what I'd really like to connect with you about and to invite you to connect into yourself about is a discussion of our identity, and in particular, our true identity. And I want to just give a quick background for this topic, which is that when I entered the arena of listening to satsang talks, and primarily that's through my attending talks by Adyashanti, I was really dropped into a world where I was hearing all kinds of new terms and new pointers and new teachings. And one of the pointers that I was hearing, or I'm not sure if it's exactly a pointer, but just one of the phrases, was that awakening is really an identity shift and a shift out of identification with the centralized me narrative, which we might call ego. And as I listened to these words and tried them on for size, which I really encourage you to do when you're listening to talks, is just kind of feel for how the words take shape for you and what kind of meaning that you would attribute to them. Because I think people use language so differently. And so when I was dropped into this world of all this new language, it really honestly took me years to get a sense of how one person might use the word identity or the word consciousness or the term awakening. And each person who is using the word had their own unique sense of what that word pointed to. And I think as experiential beings, there's kind of this constant invitation, constant challenge, opportunity to really sense what is it that we can give words to that really feels the most authentic to our own direct experience, and how do we word our experience? And so, as I was listening to this notion of identity shift, I was really checking that out and asking myself what might that mean, and do I identify with this sense of this me character that is often front and center of the narratives that run through my mind, and what does it mean to identify with that? Does it mean to have my attention there most of the time? Does it mean that that's where I'm most invested in protecting a sense of self or advocating for a sense of self in a kind of defense, offense of, what I want, what I don't want, etc.? And, or maybe that would be the flip. The defense might be what I don't want and the offense what I do want. And so I was really just asking myself, what does identity even mean, and what could identity shift mean? And so I invite you to ask those questions for yourself, because it's really in the asking the questions, as you lean into these really deep contemplations, actually, about the essential nature of who you are, that you really begin to participate in that discovery in a more conscious and active way. And so some people think that they're not really a person who is leaning toward inquiry or skilled at it. But I imagine if you look a little closer, there might be ways that you're inquiring all the time that may not take the form of perhaps more traditional inquiry in the form of a question like, who or what am I? But there might be ways that your curiosity is really examining things and feeling its way into navigating this sense of self, this sense of how this self relates to others, the sense of other, the sense of life, and the flow and exchange of inner and outer, and um, and how that might dance and flow a little bit more easily. So, circling back to this notion of identity, I at one point was really quite shocked by the pointer, which I'm sure many of you have heard by now, but for me it was so new at the time. This pointer to really see, is there a me inside? And Adya would talk about, turning within and seeing if you can actually find a me, and how might you even encapsulate that in words, and can it be defined, and can it be located? And you can even, and he was even encouraging at the time a process of really checking out, is the me in the realm of thought? Is it in the realm of feeling? Is it in the realm of awareness? And is there someone who is aware? Is there someone who is thinking? Is there someone who is feeling? Is there an experiencer, a doer, a meditator? And so these questions were really bringing light to, or directing attention to, things that were just kind of so seemingly assumed that that there, of course, there's a me. I mean, you're talking to me, and this is, when you're talking to this someone here, we call that me. When we're referring to ourselves. And so, at one level, it seems that there was an assumed identity, but the more the examination took place, the more that came into question, and specifically, what is the direct experience of that, or the direct knowing, perhaps, even beyond the identity of an experiencer. And so, as this inquiry and this investigation went on, what I really was astounded by is how the movement of mind that even seeks to investigate is founded in this sense of referencing. And Adya has spoken many times about the movement of self-referencing being kind of like a U-turn, where there's this thought of the me, and then this U-turn back to a sense of self at the center, and that constant kind of self-reflection or U-turn gives this illusion and establishes this sense of assumed identity as the me. But the more the mind became still, and I'm not just talking about the thinking mind, I'm also just talking about the sense of oneself that is tracking the world of objects, whether those be outer or inner, and is swinging attention, one way or another to somehow land or concretize on an object of perception, whether that be thought perceptions that seem to be almost going by like a ticker tape, or bubbling up from out of nowhere, or a feeling that it makes an impression on the nervous system and the body, or just simply this movement of referencing. And so then, the assumption might even become like, well, when my mind is more still, and that tendency to reference settles down and is at rest, my identity be stillness. That's also another kind of working theory that's based on the particular conditions. In this case, the absence of the U-turn, or the reflection of mind. But we do need words to speak, and the languaging that we have is founded in concretization, really, to concretize, or to point to particulars that are sort of objects of perception that cumulatively create a sense of this moment, or a sense of oneself or a sense of another. But within all of that is this sense of mystery, this sense of mystery of being that really can't be summed up and gathered into any one object of perception or any one word or any one movement or lack thereof. And so this sense of mystery is maybe a closer term to point to this kind of direct experience of life that can't be bottled up. And in our system, how that is felt and known is there is a kind of impression of whether it be stillness or quiet, or in its more less active state, or I should say in its less active state, or whether it be more brightness and presence, or a sense of essence that kind of exudes and maybe pulsates or just somehow moves in its more active state. And even these words that I'm saying, they fall short of in attempting to even point to something that's all pervading, because even that which is all pervading takes on these different shapes and forms that register in our experience and in our awareness. And so the pointer that was given is to, during those times when I was really being introduced to a lot of these terms, was to really explore the nature of awareness. And that perhaps awareness might be the foundation of this sense of the experiencer that is almost like a field of being that takes the shape of all of these thoughts or feelings or energetic constellations that register in our system as the experiencer that has these five senses and perhaps many more, and that also takes in the world of more concretized, objects that we perceive. And so to even call awareness a field is again, brings up these images in the mind. But the beauty with these pointers is that the pointers bring to our consciousness a kind of active participation in the direct knowing through being, not knowledge of accumulated facts, but the direct knowingness of being that's really participating in the expression of what you are, what I am, what others are, what life is. And so we use these words that tend to piece out a whole that really is much more cohesive than the language lends itself to. So as you examine this notion of identity, I really wanted to kind of turn the chapter of this talk into a related topic, which is that I think that the more we begin to explore the nature of awareness, the more the energy that's invested in the sense of central me begins to free up, because the attention that would be making this U-turn to constantly think about this idea of me, like how am I feeling? What am I thinking? What are my opinions? What are my desires? What are the things that I want to avoid? When all of that narrative really settles and there's this sense of quieting that movement to reference the central self, sometimes what happens is in the freeing up of that energy, the attention might open and move more into the larger field of awareness. Maybe when we're less caught in thought, all of a sudden we see things in the world. Maybe we notice things that we're walking by that we wouldn't have seen if we were, you know, not like involved in our phones, but also, involved in our minds and our narratives and our thoughts. So there's this kind of opening of perspective that shifts this sense of awareness from being more focused into a more spacious awareness, and our perception changes and shifts. But it's not always true that the attention swings outward when it's freed up from making this U-turn toward the me narrative. There might be a sense of energy really settling and almost following gravity and resting more downward, and the attention might be just more rather still, or maybe we could use a different word, if not more actively still, then maybe just kind of more neutral, and not in any one mode of outer or inner, but sort of like somewhere that doesn't land on either side of the equation. And so awareness almost seems to take these positions. It can feel like where we might look within and turn our attention within, and all of a sudden we're more aware of our interior life. Or we might be, looking out and be more aware of what we might think of like as a boundless field of awareness that doesn't have any edge or hard boundary. But then we also might have kind of more of something in between, like an awareness that's neither super focused nor being experienced as something more vast or boundless, but something kind of almost like more in balance. And it could also be that awareness informs this instrument of our body in a way where that kind of comes online more, and all of a sudden you may feel more body awareness, like, oh, I really feel myself sitting in this seat as I'm listening to this talk, or all of a sudden I'm just a little bit more aware of my breath, and if it's up in the chest or down lower in the belly, and might be a little bit more aware of just the functionings of what it is to abide and rest in the body. So there's even ways that awareness is given these different, I guess you could say, locations, and they're just very closely tied to energy, because the energy that's freed up from that U-turn back to that sense of central me, that gets freed up, and energy needs to go somewhere, and so sometimes it goes many places, or it has an emphasis of maybe settling downward or opening outward, or something in between, maybe a blend. So all this is not to try to concretize and say like, oh, you are this one particular kind of awareness, or you are stillness, or you are the lifing, that's expressing, all around and within. We could say all those things, and they're all pointers. And yet, none of the pointers are all knowing or all conclusive. There's this wonderful phrase in Zen, which is, don't mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon. And that's a wonderful statement that is often interpreted as, something along the lines of what I'm saying. We might have a pointer that points to a certain kind of awareness, global awareness, body awareness, internal, interiorized awareness, but none of those pointers are really that they shouldn't be mistaken for the totality of being, and yet we follow the pointers, and there's something interesting that happens, and it can kind of feel sometimes like a combination of things happen. It can kind of feel like a massage where you feel like you got, something stuck here and something stuck there. And, pretty soon, like as the body's moved around and loosened and, freed up, a lot of these concretizations just kind of harmonize into the whole system, or they kind of cease to draw all the energy into these localized stuck points, and things can free up. And when I mean things, it can be identities, it can be, conclusions, beliefs, thought patterning, emotions, all sorts of things can free up. But also, something else can happen as we explore and get curious as we explore these pointers, especially like a kind of a whole grouping of pointers, like the sense of global awareness or body awareness or interiorized awareness, or we could also say, intimate attention within. When we explore all these different roads or avenues of pointers, something happens where the picture starts to fill in. Instead of just kind of having, this one part of the picture filled in, the picture starts to fill in and become more rich. And instead of, let's say, just having the little stick figure of yourself in the picture, all of a sudden there's a sense of the sky and the world around you, and, all of the other life forms, and a sense of this world within that really enlivens and helps our consciousness, come online in new levels of perceiving and knowing in our being about the nature of things, about the nature of ourselves and reality and life as a whole. So when I said I was going to kind of turn the talk toward a particular exploration of identity, I'm not sure I exactly succeeded in that yet, because what I really wanted to talk about was this shift in identity that Adya talks about in Awakening. And I want to talk a little bit about my experience of that, which is, many of you may know that I, for a long time, was really contemplating an inquiry on the nature of rest, and that kind of morphed into or evolved into this inquiry on the nature of stillness through the question, what is stillness? And I was following along the lines of that inquiry for a couple reasons. One is that I just had a very busy and active life, and something seemed to be driving me, and it wasn't just ideas about like goals that I had or things that I wanted to do or my own sense of will. There was a combination of things driving me, something in me that just truly wanted to know more deeply and more clearly, that Adya may use pointers that point to this kind of thing, like a movement of consciousness that seeks to become more conscious of itself and itself in its myriad of expressions. But also, not to put words in his mouth, but I'm paraphrasing. So, but there's also a way that this inquiry, I'm not sure if I dropped a thought there, but getting back to the inquiry, what is stillness? It really also spoke to this part of me that felt like it was always moving somehow, like based on this drive to that was based in like this push-pull of desire and resistance, that some part of me that just wasn't as settled as I intuited was possible, and that picked up on other things in my environment that weren't as settled or as at peace that would be possible. And when Adya would talk about inner division and this push and pull, something in me became interested in stillness as an antidote to that push-pull energy that was also very much driving me, just as much as the conscious, that we could call the movement of consciousness that wanted to to know. And it's not that those are even always separate things. Sometimes they become conflated, like the sense of the push-pull and the inner division, but also the sense of something that seems beyond all that wants to flower and come to the fore. So as I was contemplating this question, what is stillness, there was an intuiting of, without ever having heard Ady's teaching about this U-turn, and that happens, that comes back to the central me. I mean, I don't believe I'd heard it at that point. I think he started talking about that in later, subsequent years. But still, there was this intuition of what might stillness be, because that would give a sense of rest and cessation to these drives of desire and resistance. But it also might be the very doorway to a kind of knowingness of being that is not defined by that whole world of the me narrative and the me wants and desires or not wants and resistances. And so that seemed to match so well with these pointers that have been through religious traditions throughout the ages to direct us toward a sense of peace and inner peace, and that stillness seemed to feel like it would be the doorway, or at least a close cousin to peace. So in that inquiry that I did as I became more and more still in my person physically, energetically, and things settled, and my curiosity was really based in the body of how still can this body and mind become. And that was in sitting meditation, that question. And I took that question really as far as I could go. Like my body just became more and more still. My breath was slowing and slowing and slowing to being very, very periodic. I could even feel the movement of my mind that would want to reference, like slowing down, slowing down, slowing down, to where it seemed like the brain was just this really light pulsation, and the heart was calmer and quieter and quieter and quieter and slower. And so as these things happen, I'm not saying that you have to do things this way at all. I'm just sharing my experience. But as the body was showing me that there is a kind of stillness in this realm of the physical and the energetic, it was taking me to a doorway that was closer to a knowledge of stillness that really is something that we can never box up. Sometimes I call it the stillness that moves all things, because that statement kind of points to this paradox of the essence of things in their distilled form that is an essence that is neither boxed in by movement or lack of movement. And so as I, had the body kind of help me get a little bit closer to a sense of direct experience of what stillness might be, then spontaneously this question of what is stillness took on its own life. And it was almost as though the more my consciousness went inward and my body became more still and followed gravity more down into a very yin-like experience. Yin is the feminine principle that's more inward, more based in form, more of the body, more downward, more dark, more still. And the yang masculine principle being its opposite, all of a sudden just kicked in. Because that's the yin-yang theory, that's the yin-yang principle, that when the yin is at its zenith, it kicks into a yang cycle, it transforms. And so as my consciousness went very inward and really took that question to the point where my curiosity was like, if I were to track the sense of stillness any further, it would be a kind of hungry, wanting to know, like, and, just sort of milking the inquiry, like, what is stillness? But I could tell that if I kept at the question, what is stillness in this interior examination, that if I kept at it, it would only be more movement. And so something in me recognized, oh, the sense of the inquiring one, the inquirer, the questioner is the remaining active movement here. So I just recognized spontaneously that had to be put to rest in order for stillness to reveal. But as that happened, what happened was the attention just spontaneously went into the outer world and was tracking the larger body of life and sensing for the stillness that was present in the environment as my senses listened to. It was in the evening. You're listening to in the summertime, listen to the crickets and the creek flowing by outside and the wind in the leaves, if there was much of that, because it was quite warm and more static. But the idea is that there was a curious intelligence that was a part of this awareness that cast itself into the global environment. And I think this is extremely interesting as I look back on it, because sometimes we think of awareness as a more neutral field in which objects of perception arise, or we might think of that field of awareness as taking shape as these objects, almost like the play of consciousness being form. I don't even know if almost like is the correct word. We could say, consciousness taking form as these, as a solid experience, But the notion that there's an intelligence within this awareness that doesn't belong to anyone in particular. That sense of myself as the questioner laid itself down, and then there's a spontaneous furthering of the question that I hadn't anticipated at all on my own. And so, but the intelligence knew to carry that question out into the senses, exploring the outer world and having a communion with that sense of stillness in the very motion of life all around. And so when I asked that question now, what is it that Adya was pointing to when he was talking about this identity shift? Because in my experience, what took over was something that intelligence that was furthering the inquiry and the question of what is stillness in the life all around. That intelligence didn't feel like it had anybody's identity. It certainly didn't feel like it was my intelligence, as I had known myself as a person who identified with, meditating or inquiring or, even being or experiencing. It felt free of identity. And I thought, well, why is it Adya talking about identity shift in the sense of like, does it shift to something else? Is there a new identity that takes place? Is it just a shortcoming of our language and another example of how pointers fall short? So when he talks about the identity shifting out of a sense of central self, which we might call ego, where does it shift to? Does it shift to the sense of the whole? Does it shift to a sense of the undivided as it permeates within and without? As it what's the right word? As it ascends through and through the yin and then ascends, through and through the yang, as that consciousness is carried through this intelligent exploration of within and without, stillness and movement, you know. And as it weaves and travels this whole journey, does it fill in that picture I was talking about? Is that how a sense of wholeness is known through the carrying of consciousness? And I was curious about this because one of my earlier teachers was Paramahansa Yogananda, and he was a person who was extremely devotional. And he also spoke a lot of his experiences of traveling the cosmos, you know, out in the galaxies and into this very macro stage of this play of consciousness as form, as the manifest. And that wasn't my experience of awakening. The experience was more of like the general movement of knitting inside and outside by carrying consciousness through this traveling of within and without. And so it's kind of like the painter, you know, learning the basic brush strokes without having painted everything, you know, without having seen all the galaxies and cosmos, but yet sensing the unboundaried, you know, sensing the essence that is permeating form all around us and within us, that's permeating stillness and movement, that's permeating the very structures and kind of like patternings and of life, you know, these movements and expressions of states of stillness and you know, very much active. And so it's not necessary that our consciousness, you know, I believe it's not necessary that our consciousness explore, you know, all of the realms. I don't even think it's possible. But that that a fluidity enters into our direct knowledge of being, or that the direct knowledge of being it moves as this fluid dance that is carrying us with it, or borrowing our consciousness to experience it. Our own instrument of senses and sights and hearing and smells and sounds and actually attention, the light of consciousness that registers all these things. So this journey of consciousness that expresses in all these different ways as this tremendous life intelligence is not something we typically call identity. You know, identity is something we often think of as localized, you know, or something we put in the paradigm of concretization, you know, and locating and referencing. So this whole pointer of identity shift has been an interesting one to me. And I remember when Adya would use that phrase after I'd had this inquiry into what was stillness and this kind of knitting together of my consciousness in both the stillness, into the stillness within movement, inside and outside. There was a much greater sense of shifting out of the identity of the divided one and into a sense of the whole. And when that happened, I was like, I don't really get that pointer of his, and I had a little hubris forming as my mind was concretizing on the awakening experience I had that was, you know, even questioning, like, you know, how could Adya use that phrase? Like, that doesn't seem accurate. because nothing really lands in that freedom, and identity shifting even to the sense of the formless just felt like a pointer that would land in some alternate identity to the separate self. But I also knew I was overthinking it, because Adya teaches by feel, and his pointers are often by feel, or they challenge, what is being held, and are inviting this sense of turning our consciousness in new directions and opening perspectives. And I tend to have a very literal mind, and so I always have to keep that in check when I listen to him and just feel, where he's pointing to. But even still, had been this question that lived in me about identity. And it wasn't so much a mental thing. It was just more of a question of, does a sense of self constellate as this one that has this unique incarnation, as this one, as you, that has his or her or their, own unique incarnation. And is that something that is also present? Because in that dance and that knowing of, there's a whole journey within, there's a whole journey without, and these movements are the very movements that knit reality and heal division and shift a sense of self. But I think at some level, I knew that my identity had swung from something very concretized to something very liberated, but those were both two extremes, and I wasn't sure how they were going to knit together. And at the time, I couldn't even have been able to tell you that, but I can say it now, that something in me did not know how they were going to knit together or if they would, but I intuited that they would. And I think that how they knit together is something that I really wanted to share tonight in my words. And again, this is always a risk of concretizing something that has, no need to be concretized. And yet there's a desire to share this, because sometimes the pointers really can have an effect that hopefully can put to rest some things that may kind of tap on your shoulder or tug at your curiosity, or kind of push you to examine a little more deeply. And so as I share this next thing, it's not so much to offer another thing to concretize around, but rather to just see how it washes in, how it shifts the way that your system might organize around these rhythms of life, that carry our consciousness into new perspectives. And so what I wanted to share with you about is what I might call, at least for tonight, I might call soul identity. And after the big shift that I had experienced on the heels of the inquiry, what is stillness, I think that I really just couldn't relate to the word soul. There was some sense that the energy had swung so far from this localization into a sense of a whole that somehow my body energetics and my mind sensed was more boundless, that I just couldn't really organize very well around localization. It's not that I didn't feel things deeply in my heart. I mean, that was more available to me than ever. But just as far as like a sense of central someone, it just wasn't really computing. So as things unfolded in my case, it took me many years to sort of feel a sense of central self that felt authentic, that wasn't based in the me identity, that wasn't based in history, that wasn't based in the push and pull of desires and resistance. But it was all there in the seed of that moment where I was asking what is stillness, and my consciousness was more inward. It all was in the seed of that moment where the questioner laid itself down, and the intelligence of life, or we could say the intelligence inherent in the question that had its own destiny, you could say, or I don't even know if that's the right word, but its own trajectory, that pointed the awareness of this instrument to the surroundings of the creek and crickets, etc. That intelligence seems to have a seat in us. And we could call that seat of intelligence our soul. And sometimes that seat feels like it's been grown into the whole of the manifest world. And don't take this like to concretize in that way. It may not ever feel like that. It's not important. But the point I'm trying to make is sometimes we can't find a place in ourselves. We can't sense any core of essence, of intelligence, of life. Sometimes it's really available. I remember growing up when they would say God is within. I would just really try to tune deeply into the core. Sometimes it would feel like it was in my heart. Or sometimes it would felt like it was almost like this just general area of core, like something that felt deeper, and somehow just that sense of depth, whatever you want to call it, just seemed like it had life to it, that it wasn't just like an inert emptiness, but it was something to attune to. And that attunement was an offering of my attention, you could say, a sharing of my personal consciousness with that depth that brought it into greater consciousness. It was like this dance of listening within, and it's like a call and response that can elicit an inner life. It can develop an inner life that responds. And it can, take the shape of intuitions, or, still small voice, or leanings, or inclinations, or things that light you up, or things that maybe echo in your consciousness of, nuh-uh, that doesn't feel right, or that's off. Did I say echo in your consciousness? I meant echo in your conscience, if I didn't say that correctly. So this notion of like this soul identity, this very, I don't know if condensed is the right word, but it's almost like a gathering of that intelligence in a very unique imprint that's just for you. And that soul intelligence is this that might express in a very quiet atmosphere. And it might feel like the peace in one's soul, or it might, manifest as a kind of brightness, a kind of spark. Like when we say something speaks to our soul, it's those are the things that light us up from the inside, from the core. And so it might be a brightness. But that sense of soul identity, it doesn't have the kind of identity as the me or the ego that concretizes. But it does seem to localize and be very unique. I remember once I was speaking to Tammy Simon, who some of you may know as the founder, and possibly, I believe her role is still the president of Sounds True, a publishing company that puts on lots of courses and puts out lots of recordings and in some cases books. And a lot of them are along the lines of spirituality and self-growth. And one day I was speaking to her, and she said to me, how, in your experience, does your feeling about Yogananda being your guru and Adya being your teacher, how are they different? And it was just this fantastic question. I'd never really been asked to form in a very, specific way. And I said, well, let me sit with that and I'll get back to you. And we were together for a lunch. And by the time the lunch finished, I said, I have an answer for you. And I said, Yogananda has been the guardian of my soul, and Adya has been the liberator of my soul. And that just felt so true. And sometimes there's words that come from beyond our mind. You feel something, like you listen to someone very intimately, and what they're saying washes into you, and something responds. But it doesn't respond to the part of your mind that's like tracking every detail of what they said. It's like more of a call and response of the essence of their words that washes into you, and it hits the essence in you, and that essence responds in some words that are often fresh and surprising to the thinking mind that couldn't have come up with them. And that was kind of how this response came for Tammy. It came a little bit before I actually said it, but when it came, I knew it came from a wisdom that had traveled some journeys with Yogananda and Adya in a way that could speak to those journeys in ways that my thinking mind could never have really ever journeyed, because the thinking mind mostly lives in the realm of concretization. It's more tends to map the pieces or speak to the pieces, as opposed to ever being able to really, the thinking mind doesn't have the capacity to grasp a sense of the whole that dances in a way that the single pieces just can't grasp. Adya always uses this great pointer that the thinking mind cannot grasp the infinite because the thinking mind is finite. And it actually operates, I'd go further to say that it actually operates in the realm of the finite by focusing on objects of perception and naming them and mapping them and organizing them. So there's an intelligence of our being that can use the languaging that we learn through having a thinking mind. It can reflect through language, but that it comes from a kind of intelligence that has journeyed through these waters of life, or these paths of life that our consciousness can travel, that are much more of the paradigm of the wholeness. So when I said that Adya was the liberator of my soul, it was an intuitive thing. It was a sense that the soul was calling me beyond the sense of divided self to a greater sense of wholeness. And I think you probably feel that in yourself. Something calls you to spirituality. Something calls you to new perspective, to new ways of being, to freshness, to the undivided state. And we could say that that's our soul's journey to take us beyond the identity of separate self or divided self. But I don't think the journey stops there. I really don't. I think there can be this sense of, being liberated from an identity that feels localized, but that feels even perhaps like identity drops out of the center, usually at least for a while. But that that sense of freedom or liberation of the soul isn't just freedom from. It's not just a freedom from. And Adi has this beautiful statement about how there's freedom from, and there's freedom to, and there's freedom from freedom. And so I think that there's a way that in these cycles of life, like traveling the yin to its zenith, and then traveling the yang, and then traveling the yang to its zenith, and then starting into the yin. There's these cycles of being liberated from a sense of localized egoic consciousness into what often feels more vast, but at least it feels, less boxed in, But then there can also be a sense of the energy returning and having its seat in a sense of localization. Do we call it identity then? Definitely debatable, but we could maybe call it soul identity as a sense of return to our distinct sense of self and really inhabiting our unique incarnation. And that process can be through, a whole process of confronting, the beliefs that we have that divide, or the emotions that we have that have been suppressed or denied and held separate. And it can be a process of liberating those. It can be a process of encountering all kinds of people and all kinds of situations and learning to, in a sense, it sounds so Pollyanna-ish, but in a sense, just learn to say yes to them. And it's not like you have to walk around and go like, yeah, I love this person that actually I don't really enjoy being around. It's not like that. Or, I love, this sense of destruction or suffering that's happening. It's not like that kind of yes. But there can be a sense of finding yourself in not your sense of the idea of yourself, but finding self, or finding the totality in many, many particulars that maybe somehow your person had shut out those particulars. A lot of these pointers get confusing because there still can be a place for boundaries. There still can be a place for, what's inappropriate. There still can be a place for, nope, that doesn't work for me. But what I'm speaking of are the parts of ourself that, or others, that maybe we resist, that we could look at again and just see, is it possible to be with those people, with ourselves, with these situations in new ways that are more fresh, and allow for an intelligence that moves outside of the boxes to express and have life. Do I have this perfected? Absolutely not. But there is a sense that the less and less the remnants of central self there are, as they're more put to rest, often through accepting our limitations and our quirkiness and our imperfections. That's the kind of yes I'm talking about. Through a kind of putting down the argument with those parts, or with those parts in others or in life, and saying, yes, these things might be happening, and I'm not going to energize the division. It's like an intuitive thing, and I'm trying to put words to it. But, there's just more important places for that energy to go. And it knows how to go there when it's not continually pulled into the arguments or the no or the resistance or the division. And so this is the opportunity. It's something we can lean into and explore. And I know I'm still exploring it in all kinds of new frontiers that, new people that I meet that I've never, interacted with, their dynamics, or new places, new environments, new situations. And there can always be a learning curve. There always is. And we're not supposed to get it perfect right away. But or ever, really. That's just an idea of what perfect is. And, when we put that down, then something happens that's not boxed in by perfect or imperfect. So this notion of soul identity, part of it can be felt when there's some part of us that's just willing to really be here. To acknowledge that we are here. I've had many people tell me that they got the message growing up that they're not okay. And that, others didn't give them the right to be here. Or they didn't give it to themselves. But you don't necessarily have to, because you are here. It's a done deal. The question is, whether we align with that and say, yes, I'm going to stand up in my incarnation. I'm going to take my seat. I'm going to walk this journey. And the more we consent to that, that's really what I was getting at when I was talking about the yes. Not like some grand, sort of soft yes that just has to embrace everything with a huge smile. But it's more a sense of a consent, like some sort of inner yes to being uniquely the expression of the spirit or the intelligence of life that's, we could call your soul, your incarnation. And that kind of consent, it shifts a lot of things. And it gives a place for the wholeness of the whole, or the intelligence, you could say, of the whole, to have its seat. And that's a kind of, we could call it soul identity. And what I really want to end with is that can often be felt as we could call it maybe a equanimity, a stillness. Someone I speak to fairly regularly calls it a kind of neutrality, which maybe the mind is like, what? It may have certain connotations of like nothing very intelligent and neutrality, but it's a kind of thing that's that expression of the essence of life, that it's not invested in concretization. It just operates in a whole different paradigm, and it tends to move and be quicker than thought if it in its expression, or maybe slower, to where thought kind of drops off into quietude. But it's outside of these definitions of inside and outside, and even if it does feel like it has a localization that's in your core, often it just operates in a totally different way that tends less towards dualistic, opposing categories and concretizations. So what I really wanted to say, which I didn't say yet, is that brightness, or that equanimity, neutrality, stillness, silence, peace, however it's showing up in any given moment, but some sense of the essential core of your unique expression of life that imprints itself in somewhere. It almost feels like your heart or solar plexus, or somewhere around here where the depth of your being has some sort of connection with the intelligence of life. That soul identity is something that doesn't need to remain localized. That's the take-home point. It doesn't need to remain localized. So there might be, like in the journey I've been describing tonight, a journey inward, very, very, very yin, very, very yang, very, very liberating, a kind of return to a sort of constellation around inhabiting, embodying, we've often call it, our essence, our soul self. But it doesn't remain landed here either. It moves, right? And then there's this movement of yin within, yang without, and this knitting together of these rhythms that our consciousness journeys and travels and finds its home in. That then this sense of soul brightness or peace or stillness, and you can let it fill up your whole nervous system and shine and bathe it in quiet peace and well-being, and let it go into your mind and your body and your form, and spill out into your conversations and into the activities and the things that you do, the things that you write, the food that you cook. It can really move and grow. A couple people wrote to me tonight, and they mentioned difficulty arising or physical pain. And how they've come up against walls of people that can't help them, or come up against their limits of how difficult what's arising can be. And this is perhaps one way you can orient, not to over spiritualize things. Sometimes our bodies need support with health care or healers. Sometimes our minds need support with counsel or techniques or nourishments or medicines or whatever it might be. But so not to over spiritualize things, but you can experiment with this light within you. You can experiment with this intelligence that may, in a moment, as you tune into your depth, it may be very quiet. It can be just like a quiet balm that soothes your system, that touches where the emotions are held in your body. You don't even have to name the emotions. You don't even have to know their history or their origin, but just sensing their energetics and where they are calling your attention, or where you feel that pain moving to or landing. These are places where we can most definitely turn our attention. And with that gift of attention, we can place our attention and our consciousness somewhere where we're softly holding something in the light of our awareness, a sensation or pain. And then we're intimate with it, we're with it. And it's as though that anchoring of our consciousness is kind of like a road sign, is when we're traveling a given journey, like it's a road sign that gives a sense of direction for this life intelligence that's born of our very soul to carry itself to. And so when we place our attention on a pain or a difficult emotion, just its energetics even, just the sensation of the throbbing or the stabbing or the, if it's an emotion like sadness, it might be like heaviness, or, anger, it might be more active and uprising, or fear, it might be more shaking. But whatever the energetic is, when we place our attention on it, there's a stillness within our attention that can touch those places. There's an openness in our awareness that moves far beyond our local body into the big body of life, that we can communicate to the places where the energy feels stuck. There's all this room to stretch out in. That there's a stillness that is attending to those parts in pain, that they're not actually separate. And that consciousness of it that shines through our attention can carry these qualities of our soul. You can carry this sense of the unboundary. You can carry this sense of stillness, peace, okayness, unconditional allowance, ever-present witness, bearing witness, being seen, being known, being felt. This attention that we have can be a gift that brings about a sense of union with our experience, which is another form of yes. It's, I'm not going to keep pushing this feeling down. I'm not going to keep resisting it. I'm not going to fight against the pain. I'm just going to turn my attention toward it with a totally fresh perspective. No conclusions, no labels about what's happening. Just intimacy with experience. Union of attention with the energy of what feels separate. And all of a sudden, what feels separate feels the presence of that attention. It feels the presence of those qualities of your soul. And those things that are separate respond. We don't know how they're going to respond. You remember how I was talking about the call and response of Tammy's question, and how something answered it that was far beyond the answers that I could find in the database of my thinking. There's something that responds because it's its nature to respond, because that call and response is inherent within the essence of being. It's not just a static awareness. It's an awareness that's absolutely pregnant with intelligence. And that intelligence dances in this call and response. And these parts that feel separate, they're only conscious of the pain. They're only conscious of that emotion. But when they feel the presence of something outside of themselves, all of a sudden they realize that there's an outside. All of a sudden they realize that there's some other expression of being that's different than how they're expressing. And it may even wake up a memory of the very origins of that energy that is born of that intelligence before that energy concretized into a difficult emotion, or before it concretized into pain. Those concretizations bring about a kind of forgetting and a going unconscious to the nature of wholeness, to the nature of that intelligence of life that is outside of concretization. But we can bridge that intelligence of life. We can bridge those soul qualities back to these parts that have felt forgotten, have felt separate. And I think that's a tremendous form of healing. And it's not something that you're going to get in the doctor's office. And so I really understand Farrar when you wrote about that. But it doesn't mean that doctors may not help too. There may be, or some other form of healing. Just real quick for Farrar, you mentioned the kind of pain that moves. In Chinese medicine, they call that a wind pain, because wind moves. And not a lot of the allopathic models of Western medicine know what to do with that kind of moving pain. Some practitioners might, but you might choose to go to a model of medicine that has words for that, that has journeyed through, these patternings of how the manifest can express in ways that don't lend themselves to concretization or to, the lab tests that have those specific markers, So you could try an energy medicine. And I know in Chinese medicine they have things to address moving pain, what we might call wind pain. So that's a possibility for you. And I want to thank everybody else who wrote in. I had one person named Teresa write a beautiful long thank you, really, with a report. So thank you for that. And I'm sorry your name's not Far. I just realized that your name's Farhat. So Farhat, I wish you well with exploring how the light of your awareness and the qualities of your soul might be brought to kind of surround some of the pain that you're feeling. And maybe that'll take you on a journey as your consciousness or attention moves through your body and finds places to rest and bring that light and love and intimacy and deep listening to see, what the pain actually is in a new way. Sometimes I think of the body as it only has so many ways to talk to us. And sometimes pain is a way of it asking for our attention. Sometimes, it could be an emotional pain or a physical pain. And so let's see if we can give them attention. Because whatever you give your attention to, they even talk about this in physics, like you put your attention on something and it moves, right? That's the response. It responds. So we move with our consciousness by turning our attention a certain way. What we look at moves. It's a dance, right? So, however, when we turn our attention to something, we can also place it there. And that's still light of our attention. It's really in the mode of being with. That's when what we're looking at becomes conscious of stillness and maybe remembers stillness. And maybe that stillness begins to permeate that jagged feeling or that heavy feeling. And it may lighten it. It starts to harmonize it with these qualities of space and okayness, stillness, that is present within the seat of our soul or the seat of our consciousness, we could maybe even say, if we were being creative, the seat of our identity. So thank you for that. And Haley, I hope that I spoke some to your question about the difficulties that are arising. And I think your question partly really inspired this talk about identity, because sometimes there does feel like this liberation of identity, but then our consciousness is pulled back into a lot of difficult memories or emotions that are carried over from the times when we identified with a sense of separate self. And so parts of ourselves haven't caught up to remembrance of the liberated state, and they seek to be liberated. And so it's the light of our liberating consciousness that is present regardless of how many or how few awakenings you've had. That essence within your attention is this essence of life intelligence that is inherently liberating in its quality to heal division, to heal separation. So I hope you got a sense of how it's not the identity of you as as you were as your separate self when you experience things that may have been difficult, or maybe experiencing them now and have certain patternings or triggers. I'm just speaking very generally to the whole audience now, Haley, that have not yet been resolved or harmonized into the wholeness of being. And this is just very common, that we can have a sense that our core identity shifts, but not all of our energetics and karma, you could say, or conditioned patterns or history is liberated. And there may be that phase then, like you're describing, of this call to come back for ourselves. As Adi would say, we come back for ourselves. We come back for all these parts. And one thing you can do is really try to commune with them and invite a sense of their remembrance of what they essentially are. It's not defined by separation or division. You can even ask those parts, what is it that you remember, your beginnings, your origins? What is it? Show me what you know of the source. And it can feel like the little souls of all these things in us like light up and shine and shift. It doesn't always feel like that. It can be quite different. Memories can come up. All kinds of things can happen. But that's not so much our concern. Our task is to steward our attention and know that it has great power to heal, great power to join, great power to unite, great power to free up separation and division, and to express in a paradigm of intelligence that few people give the chance to. So see if you can give your consent to that intelligence to move and express in your being, in your unique incarnation. Thank you for tuning in tonight, and I wish you all good things, and I wish you well. Namaste.